Welcome to DIY guitar making, where I usually talk about all things related to acoustic steel string guitar making. This time it's going to be a little bit different because we're going to talk about the great tonewood debate with electric guitar bodies. Now this is dangerous. This is very much like a political or a religious debate, just in the way that people emotionally attach themselves to one side of the debate or the other. In fact, I will go so far as to say that this is as close to a creationism versus natural selection level debate, or like a socialism versus capitalism style debate, than anything else in the guitar aficionado world. The question, of course, is, does the choice of wood on a solid body electric guitar impact the tone? And I'm going to add to that a little point of clarification at the end of the question, because the question should be, does the choice of wood on a solid body electric guitar impact the tone in a way that is discernible and meaningful to a human listener? And that last part's important. Now, one thing I noticed about all the other YouTube videos and forum debates on this, whether they were pro or con, is that they're all coming from the same perspective of either strictly electric guitar makers or strictly electric guitar players, which seems to make sense because it's an electric guitar question. However, what you miss from that is the perspective of the acoustic makers who originated the initial concept of tonewoods to begin with, especially the violin makers and classical guitar makers. The real sort of bait and switch trick that happened was when electric makers, whether maliciously or not, began to use the conclusions of the tonewood research that was formulated over hundreds of years by violin makers and the like. They began to apply those conclusions to the solid body of an electric guitar with no regard for the context under which those conclusions were produced. And so I'm going to explain that context, and then hopefully you'll see why that type of parallel analysis is wrong and inherently flawed. What acoustic makers were talking about when they talked about tonewoods was the wood used for the membrane of an air pump. So just visualize that for a second, like an old antique fireplace air pump. I think they call it a bellows. The thing with the nozzle at the end and the two handles where you squeeze them together and the air pumps out of the nozzle. The membrane looks sort of like an accordion. That's just one example of an air pump. The acoustic guitar is another example of an air pump. However, rather than compressing the two handles to expel air out of the system, the guitar moves air when the energy of the plucked string excites the top, which again is the membrane of our air pump. That energy is transferred to the air inside the sound box, which in turn excites the other membrane, the back plate. And so the two plates work together like this to expel air out of the sound hole and towards the listener. This energy is the output of the guitar system. The most optimal acoustic response in terms of projection and sustain happens when the plates have the optimal amount of stiffness and weight to force the air out of the sound hole efficiently. The thickness of these membranes, which is usually between 1/8 of an inch and 1/16 of an inch, and the amount of bracing and the pattern of the bracing is critical to getting the stiffness and the weight just right, which is not too loose, but not too stiff, but definitely lightweight. And this is especially important on the top plate, since the string's energy via the string itself is directly coupled to that membrane, but only indirectly coupled by means of the air in the sound box to the back plate. Now notice that so far in my description of the acoustic guitar system, I haven't mentioned any necessary materials, just that the optimal end result is that the two membranes are lightweight and in this Goldilocks range of stiffness, not too loose, not too stiff. A lot of materials can achieve this, even non-woody materials like carbon fiber. The real profound impact in the voicing of an instrument is what you do with these materials to balance the stiffness and the weight. So even in the acoustic guitar world, it is not a foregone conclusion that material selection is the principal criteria for tonal response. In fact, there's a wide variety of opinions on what plays the biggest role, but most acoustic stringed instrument makers agree that it's a combination of plate thickness, bracing, and material selection. Everyone attributes more or less importance to the tone wood choice itself, and some attributions are very scientific, and some are very anecdotal, like, say for example, oh, I used Paduk and I liked it, so I'll use it again. That's an anecdotal conclusion. Further complicating the issue of tone woods nowadays is the use of the term itself. Originally, the term tone woods was used to describe a select few species that, when thicknessed to the thicknesses that are appropriate for our air pump, again, that's about 1/8 of an inch to 1/16 of an inch in thickness, tapping on these thin slices of wood would produce a clear, bell-like tone. You can actually hold these woods at different nodal points, so like holding it here or holding it here, and get either like a low frequency hum or a high frequency bing sound. So they have a full range, but whether you get that low frequency sound or a high frequency sound, it still has a distinct bell-like quality, which really just means that it sustains and it doesn't just go thud. So here's an example of a wood that is generally not considered a tone wood, and it does just go thud. Cedars, spruces, rosewoods, among others, were all considered tone woods because they had this seemingly magical bell-like tap tone. But now the word is used differently. A tone wood today seems to be defined as any wood that is used in the tone-producing parts of the guitar. Ebony or walnut were never really considered tone woods, but now under this new understanding, any wood that is used for the plates of an acoustic guitar is marketed as a tone wood. In this new paradigm, we just choose to call some tone woods good tone woods and other tone woods bad tone woods, which is really just a misrepresentation of the original insight that some woods have this bell-like quality and others do not. And just to be clear, I'm not trying to argue that these select few tone woods are somehow superior to non-tone woods like walnut. It's actually quite the opposite. As I mentioned before, I believe that the material is just the starting point. It's the way that the material is used to achieve the result of stiffness and weight in the membranes that really matters. Okay, so how does all of this now circle back around to electric guitars? Let's do a thought experiment here and deconstruct our acoustic guitar into a solid body electric guitar. Hopefully you still have the concept and the accompanying mental imagery of the acoustic guitar system, like you see here, as an air pump. Keep that in mind as we now move over to a new system, the electric guitar. So I cut this electric guitar into a cross section just to make this point, just like I did for the acoustic guitar, and now we can compare the two. So let's take a look at both the electric guitar and the acoustic guitar side by side and deconstruct this system into this. Now we've completely lost the air chamber and the concept of an air pump entirely. Now for the moment, let's just ignore that also this top, this solid body here, is way thicker than the top of the acoustic guitar. Let's pretend that it's, still a nice thin 1/8 of an inch to 1/16 of an inch membrane. At this point though, it's really not going to matter because you've lost the air chamber. This thin top that we're talking about may still vibrate in response to the string's energy, but to what purpose if there's no trapped air in a chamber to concentrate and expel energy in the form of sound waves out the sound hole towards the listener? The string's energy that goes into the wood of a solid body simply dissipates in a diffuse way in the surrounding environment. This is why the pickups on an electric are positioned to capture the string's energy directly, Contrast this with an acoustic musician who places a microphone in front of the sound hole to capture both the direct metallic shine of the strings, but also the sustain and overtones produced by the air pump. Now for our solid body electric guitar here, the lack of an air pump is really the death nail in our tonewood theory. But if there was still any hope for the concept of tonewoods on solid body guitars, which there really isn't, I'm going to dash that hope now by taking that thin resonant membrane. Remember I said we were pretending for now that this was still a thin and resonant piece of wood that is only about 1/8 of an inch to 1/16 of an inch thick. The proper thickness that the concept of tap tuning and tonewood was built around, and I'm going to increase the thickness and thus the stiffness of that wood. And I'm not going to double it, I'm not going to triple it, I'm going to increase it by at least 12 times. Because even a thin solid body is at least 1.5 inches thick. And the industry standard for solid bodies is 1 3/4 inches. So I really want you to grasp the difference here. What we started with was a wood, let's just say it's spruce, that was so thin that you could flex it and even break it with just the fingers of one hand. And we replace it with a slab of wood that is so thick that you can balance it on another piece of wood like this and jump on it and it won't even flex, let alone break. Now, while this comparison of thickness is interesting and it just, adds another nail to the coffin for this electric guitar tonewood theory, I don't want it to take away from the main crux of my argument, which is to say that the concept of tonewoods died the moment you removed the air chamber. Now, after listening to this, if you still want to hang on to the concept of tonewoods on solid body electric guitars, you have to at least concede that the context for your theory on tonewoods is completely divorced from the original context of tonewoods as the membrane of an air pump. By the way, I really owe my understanding of the guitar as an air pump, I really owe that to Irvin Samaji, who not only wrote a fantastic book called The Responsive Guitar, I also have some DVDs of his where he gave a talk, and if you really want to understand more about the guitar, if this piqued your interest and you want to understand more about what's going on acoustically inside the sound box, I really recommend checking out any of Samaji's writings. If you learned something here, please give this video a like and subscribe so you can be notified when I release a new DIY guitar making video every Friday. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaferguitars.com or register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania.